Hello, welcome to the next episode of Bite-Sized Psychometrics. Today we're going to be talking about criterion-referenced versus norm-referenced interpretation of test scores. If you've been exposed to the concepts of assessment in any way, even just a brief introduction to assessment as part of an educational program or a degree in education as an undergrad or maybe a master's degree, you've probably heard these terms, but they're not quite what you think, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So let's dive in. So first, let's talk about norm referenced. Norm referenced means that your score on a test only tells where you are versus others who took the test, or more likely as part of a calibration sample. If it's a small test, like a quiz in a classroom, it's probably you versus the others that took it then. But if it's a national test that goes across years, like a university admissions thing, it's probably versus a calibration sample. And your score is probably going to be put onto the normal curve like you see here. And this normal curve is often repackaged into what we call scaled scores as psychometricians. And that scaled score is really just nothing other than a repackaging, like the term that I just mentioned. My undergrad professor in assessment taught me that as the best way to describe it. So the normal curve, if you go back to your statistics class, is expressed in terms of z-scores from -3 to +3, like you see down there below. But that can easily be converted to what psychometricians call t-scores, which has a mean of 50 and a standard deviation of 10. And these also can be converted to percentile ranks, like you see in the bottom row there. But these numbers can be converted to just about anything else that you please. So instead of having 50 as the middle number, we could choose 500 as the middle number. And instead of having 10 as the standard deviation, we could choose 100, because that's also a nice round number. Well, if you did that, that gets you to the traditional score scale of the SAT, the Scholastic Aptitude Test in the United States, with a mean of 500 and standard deviation of 100. But regardless of what the number scales is, your number, your score, only tells you where you stand versus other people. So if you got a t-score of 60, that's the same as SAT of 600, means you're at the 84th percentile, or a z-score of plus 1.0. And just tells you where you are versus the rest. It doesn't have any notation or connotation about how much you've actually learned or how much you know in a descriptive fashion. Now, criterion reference, on the other hand, tells you where you are versus some descriptive criterion, or criteria. It could be multiple ones. A common one is CFER, Common European Framework Reference for Languages, in terms of mastery of language, from A1 up to C2. And there's specific descriptors of what those are for different types of languages, being able to hold conversations, being able to read academic papers, being able to have near fluent conversations. There's descriptors like that that goes into those. In medical certifications, or pretty much any other professional certifications, there's some descriptor about what happens when you pass. You're qualified to be a surgeon, you're qualified to be a nurse. And then, there's certain things that are described as what means mastery, what makes you qualified to be in that role or work in that job. And you can also think of high jump as something like that too. Maybe they set the bar at 5 feet and they test everybody to see whether you can jump more than 5 feet. That is a purely descriptive criterion. It doesn't matter how many other people are above or below 5 feet. It's just whether or not you were able to jump more than 5 feet or not. So the key here is that it doesn't matter how other people score, that your description of the score only goes back to that original description. Now, the key thing to remember as we're talking about this from the big picture is that this is describing an interpretation of the score, not the score itself, because many test scores can be interpreted both ways. You can even think of it as some of those ones I just talked about. So your score in an English test might be C1 with the description that goes with it, but it could also just be described as a percentile. Maybe you were 85th percentile for the people in your country. A high jump might be above 5 feet to qualify for a state meet in terms of pass or fail, but it also can be described as your turning place. Were you first place, second place, third place? And those certification exams, yes, there is a pass-fail with a descriptor of what goes around or what is involved with the pass-fail, but it can also be described as a percentile rank compared to other people who took the test. So the key thing to remember is where the validity evidence is for and what the test was truly designed for. You can think about it this way. A university admissions test could be used for high school graduation. It's fairly close to it. And vice versa, a state high school graduation exam could be used for university admissions. That's not really what those were truly designed to do. Maybe there's a really strict high school graduation curriculum with science, but maybe the universities in your country don't teach much of science because, well, I suppose many university um, majors don't require any knowledge of science. Uh, and so then what comes down is having validity evidence for each use. Any test could be theoretically used for just about any purpose. You could use a personality test for university admissions. I mean, theoretically, there's no reason you couldn't use that, except for the fact that it's not going to predict performance at a university. You could also have like a test of English basic skills as a university admissions test. You could have a test of computer skills as a university admissions test. These would all have varying degrees of validity, how well they predict performance at a university. Some might be better than others, but a test should be designed for the specific use that it's designed for. And then you should have evidence showing that it supports the usage of that test in that role, whether it is predicting universities' performance or something else. So that's a quick introduction to norm referenced versus criterion referenced interpretations of test scores in educational assessment. If you are interested in more detail on this, there is a blog post on assess.com. Please visit that, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Thanks.